This tutorial is going to continue covering the Action Apps object properties. There are some additional Action Apps properties that we can access in this sidebar, many of which would be available for several different stitch applications. First, we're going to cover the underlay. Underlay is stitching that is sewn before the top layer is sewn. It's used to stabilize the fabrics so your stitching doesn't distort the material. When you originally set your recipe under the digitize worksheet properties, you're going to set your fabric, you're going to set your machine, automatic underlays will be applied to your design. However, if you need to adjust it, you can do that with the underlay options. I have laid down a shape here. I applied a complex fill to it. I'm going to go ahead and increase the density so that I can see what's going on in here. Let's go ahead and make it a color as well. So I have this object selected. I have my complex fill options over here in my object properties, but I'm going to go ahead and access the other parts of this object with my drop-down menu. I'm going to choose the underlay drop-down menu. This option is available for the complex fill, but it is also available when you are using steel stitch, the complex fill with steel stitch, satin stitch, and also the embroidery text. These are the different types of underlay that you can apply to your object. The contour, if I click on that, you can see right here in my preview, is basically just a smaller version of our square here. There you go. It's just set in. I can adjust my stitch length over here. If I want to, I can adjust the inset. So I made it 2 millimeters. Now it's further in. The perpendicular underlay is running perpendicular to our stitch pattern here, so it's running in the opposite direction of our top stitch pattern. I can adjust the density. We can make it smaller or bigger. So now it's less dense because I upped the density length. We can also adjust your stitch length here. This option here, number of lines, is unavailable right now with the complex fill. However, let me put down a smaller shape. I'm going to go ahead and apply a satin path to it. Now if we go to our underlay options, you can see that the number of lines is available to us, and I can actually change this in here. So I chose 4, so now there's 4 lines. Let's go back to our complex fill shape. I'm going to apply a parallel. The parallel is running parallel to our complex fill. It's almost hard to see it sometimes. There we go. So it's running in the same direction as my top stitches. Next here, the zigzag is not available for complex fill. It is available, however, for our satin path. So let's go back to our auto satin path object. Go ahead and click on zigzag. Hit apply. There you can see. So this zigzag will be stitched out first, and then the satin path on top of it. Lattice and full lattice, those are for the complex fill shapes. Lattice is diagonal stitching. Full lattice goes both ways. So as far as underlays go, full lattice is the densest option. So that covers the underlay options. I'm going to go ahead and delete these 2 shapes. And now we're going to go ahead and cover pull compensation. Pull compensation is basically going to be compensating for the pull of the fabric. Just like underlay, when you set your recipe, pull compensation will be applied to your design if necessary. However, you can adjust them as needed. Pull compensation can be applied in two ways, percentage and absolute. In order to show you the difference between adding pull compensation by percentage or absolute, I'm going to make a shape within Corel Draw using my artistic media right here. I'm just smoothing it out a bit. Now let's make it vector. I'm just going to go under Arrange, break Artistic Media Group apart. So now we have a vector shape here. Apply a satin path to it. And now let's go under here to our pull compensation. So right now it's set on none, and I can adjust it by percentage or absolute. We're going to go ahead and start with percentage. I'm going to set the value at 125%. Hit apply. So now you can see that pull compensation has been applied. As my design gets thinner, then the pull compensation is less. Where my object is wider, then there's more pull compensation being applied. We can also set the max range here. So if I want to apply pull compensation by percentage, but I don't want the pull compensation to exceed 5 millimeters, then we just set the max range to 5 millimeters. And so see, now it's still adding it by percentage, but it only goes to 5 millimeters. So once it hits 5 millimeters, then it stays at that distance out. Now let me go ahead and show you the absolute. So if I choose absolute, and then I set my value here for 2 millimeters. So absolute is just a set distance outside my vector path. So whether the design is thin or thick, this is 2 millimeters outside my object the entire way around. So that's the difference between the two types of pull compensation. Absolute is probably the more common over percentage, but it works either way. Next, I'm going to go ahead and cover our quality control. However, this shape won't really show us what's happening. So let me lay down a capital T inside of Corel. I'm going to apply an auto satin path to it. The reason I chose a T is because T is one of those objects where the auto satin path will break this apart. So you can see there's actually been a break applied in my T into two different objects. We have the upper horizontal bar and then the lower vertical one. The way this is stitching out right like this, you can imagine that it might end up with some gapping right here where some of the fabric would show through. To eliminate that, we use quality control. So let's go ahead to our quality control. I'm going to go ahead and click on automatic overlap and hit apply. So you can see that now my column here is pulling down into my vertical. So the top one is going to be stitched first, followed by the bottom one, and there'll be absolutely no gapping in here. If I need to adjust the distance of the overlap, I can do that with the overlap distance here. Just type in the length in millimeters and hit apply. Next, we're going to go over the automatic clip feature right here. Automatic clip, what it does, it's kind of like the trim tool inside of Corel, but for stitches. So just like trimming in Corel, you need more than one object. I'm going to go ahead and put a square in here. Apply a complex fill to it. So if I put my T on top of my square, right now the full black square would stitch out, and then the T would stitch out on top of it, creating a really dense area right here where there would be a lot of stitches. To fix this, I'm going to use the automatic clip. So I'm going to select clip stitches. I'm doing this to the square, hit apply. Now the T is trimmed out of the square. The way that this is right now, there could be some gapping between the T and the square when it's stitched out, so I can set an overlap distance. That would take care of any gapping that would happen. I selected the clip stitches box because I applied it to the square, which is underneath the T. This clip stitches below is the box I would check if I were applying the automatic clip to the upper object, the T in our example here. So let me go ahead and remove the automatic clip from the square. Now I'm going to select my T. I'm on automatic clip, and I select clip stitches below and hit apply. It looks like nothing has happened here because I've actually changed the properties of the square in relation to the T. So to refresh that, I simply clip on the square, go to Action Apps Object, Generate Selection, and there we go. So now you can see it's clipped away. So it has the same end result, it just depends on which object you're applying the automatic clip. That would depend on whether or not you're using the clip stitches or clip stitches below. We're also going to go ahead and take a look at the last two options here, commands and lock stitch. I'm going to add another black square. Apply complex fill to it. I'm going to go into my object manager and put it next to my other black object so I don't have any unnecessary color changes. So the way that this would work is that my machine would stitch out the big black square first, then the smaller one, then there will be a color change and it would switch out the pink T. In order to make this a efficient design, I can actually click on both of my black squares here, go to Action Apps Object, and do the auto start and stop. Alright, so let's go back to our object properties and come over to our commands. First, I want to cover the thread number. This number relates to the threads that are listed in the Action Apps color palette. Right here. The colors in this palette are numbered starting with 0. So the royal blue is 0, tomato red is 1, eucalyptus is 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Under commands, I can change the color by typing in the thread color and hitting apply. This is a rather archaic way of changing the colors in our design. It's much easier to make color adjustments inside of your Action Apps palette. I just wanted to let you know what this thread number is referring to. The most important part of our command section is the ability here to add start and stop commands. If I look at this design in 3D, you can actually see that I have a thread that's going from the bigger square to the smaller square. We're actually going to fix that by applying a trim command right before it crosses over this gap. So if you remember, we had checked this in our object manager, and we know that the big square is stitching out first, followed by the smaller square. So I clicked on my big square, I go to commands, I can apply a trim by changing the square's stop command to trim and hit apply. So you can see that a trim has been applied right here. And now if I look at this in my 3D view, the black thread has been eliminated. The last drop-down option we're going to cover is our lock stitches. Lock stitches are a small bunch of stitches that would be applied just before a trim to prevent the stitches from coming undone. So I'm clicked on the large square. If we go to our lock stitches, right now the locks are set on always, but with no type assigned to the start or the end. If I select everything on my design at once, I can set it to do a lock stitch for everything, but I'm just clicked on the square right now, so I'm going to go ahead and apply a lock. I can choose to start with one or end with one. I'm going to choose to end one. I'm going to go ahead and choose basic, hit apply, zoom in here. This is my lock stitch. Basic looks like a little bow tie shape. If I go to line, it's just a line of stitches. And that is how we can apply a lock stitch.